The stagecoach wheel splintered against the boulder with a sound like breaking bones. Margaret Elizabeth Thornton felt her world tilt sideways as the vehicle lurched and crashed, throwing her against the leather-padded wall. Her traveling dress, fine gray wool from Boston, tore at the shoulder seam. Books scattered from her valise, volumes of poetry, and a leather-bound journal filled with her neat handwriting pages fluttering like dying birds in the desert wind. Through the settling dust, she heard them coming. Hoofbeats thundered across the hard-packed earth, punctuated by wild whoops that made her blood run cold. The driver was already dead. She'd seen his body fall when the first shots rang out. The guard had lasted longer, firing back until a bullet found him too. She pressed herself against the overturned coach, splinters digging into her palms. The sun blazed overhead, merciless in the Arizona Territory sky. Her throat was dry as sand, her heart hammering against her corset stays. They circled like wolves. She counted 6 riders through the gaps in the wreckage, their faces obscured by dust and shadow beneath wide-brimmed hats. These weren't the noble cowboys from the dime novels she'd read back east. These men moved with predatory grace, weapons loose in their hands, death written in every line of their bodies. "Check the strong box," a voice commanded, deep, rough as sandstone. Margaret held her breath as boots hit the ground. They were picking through the wreckage now, looking for valuables. The other passengers, a merchant and his wife, had fled on foot into the desert. She'd seen them go. The woman's blue dress a splash of color against the brown landscape before they disappeared over a ridge. Part of her wished she'd run too. Part of her knew it wouldn't have mattered. A shadow fell across her hiding spot. Before she could react, strong hands gripped the broken door and wrenched it aside like it weighed nothing. Sunlight blinded her, and then she was being dragged out by her arm, stumbling on torn petticoats. The man who held her was tall, broader than any gentleman she'd known. His grip wasn't cruel, but it was inexorable as iron shackles. She got an impression of dark hair, sun-weathered skin, a jaw shadowed with several days' growth of beard. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch gray as winter storm clouds, holding depth she couldn't read. "Well, well," another rider drawled, spurring closer. This one was younger, meaner, with pale eyes that made her skin crawl. "Looks like we found ourselves a prize after all." The tall man's hand shifted to her waist, and Margaret trembled. Not just from fear, though fear was certainly there, cold and sharp in her belly. His touch burned through the layers of her dress and corset like a brand. Those rough fingers splayed possessively across her ribs, and something primitive in her recognized the gesture for what it was, a claim. "She's mine." 2 words, spoken quiet, but they carried weight that made the younger man's horse dance backward. "Come on, Jake," the younger one protested. "We always share the spoils." Jake Colton turned his head slightly, just enough to fix the other man with that storm-gray stare. "Not this time. Will." The challenge hung in the air like heat shimmer. Margaret barely dared to breathe. She'd stumbled into some hierarchy she didn't understand, where violence simmered just below the surface and her fate hung on the word of this dark stranger whose hand hadn't moved from her waist. An older rider, grizzled and scarred, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Let it be. Will, man's got a right to first claim. Sides, we got what we came for." He patted the strongbox tied to his saddle. Jake's hand slid lower, settling at the curve where her waist met her hip. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable. Margaret's face burned, but she forced herself to stay still. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to run, but those fingers might as well have been steel cables. And where would she run? They were miles from anywhere, the desert stretching endless in every direction. "Can you ride?" Jake's question startled her. His voice was different when he spoke to her, still rough, but without the edge of threat. Yes." The word came out a whisper. She cleared her throat, tried again. "Yes." "Good." Without warning, He lifted her like she weighed nothing and set her on his horse. The animal was a big bay gelding, well-muscled and steady. Jake swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his arm coming around her waist to take the reins. She was pressed against him now, could feel the heat of his body through her torn dress. He smelled of leather and gunpowder, sweat and something else, something wild and indefinably male that made her pulse race in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "What's your name?" His breath stirred the wisps of hair that had escaped from her pins. "Margaret." She hated how small her voice sounded. "Margaret Elizabeth Thornton." He made a sound that might have been amusement. "That's a mouthful of name for such a little thing. Maggie suits you better." No one had ever called her Maggie. It was too familiar, too casual. But from his lips, in that rough whisper, it sounded like something else entirely, like he was already remaking her into something that belonged in this harsh land. They rode hard. The gang spread out but keeping pace. Margaret tried to memorize landmarks, but everything looked the same: red rocks and scrub brush, distant mesas shimmering in the heat. Jake's arm was an iron band around her waist, keeping her secure in the saddle, but also keeping her precisely where he wanted her. The sun was starting to sink when they finally slowed. Ahead, she could see what looked like a cluster of buildings tucked into a canyon, not a town exactly, more like a rough camp. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could see people moving about. Women, she realized with surprise, and children. "Welcome to Paradise Valley," Jake said, and she could hear the irony in his voice. "Your new home." The word home sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. As they rode into the camp, faces turned to watch. She saw curiosity, suspicion, and in some cases, pity. These people knew what it meant when Jake Colton brought a woman back to camp. His hand shifted on her waist, fingers spreading in that possessive gesture she was already beginning to recognize. She trembled again, and his arm tightened fractionally, not threatening, almost protective. But protection and possession were two sides of the same coin out here. She was learning. And as Jake Colton lifted her down from his horse, his hands lingering just a moment too long at her waist before sliding away, Margaret knew her life as a proper Boston lady was over. What it would become instead remained to be seen. The camp was nothing like the lawless den of thieves Margaret had imagined. As Jake led her through the dusty paths between buildings, she saw vegetable gardens scratched into the hard earth, laundry flapping on lines, a woman grinding corn in the traditional way. Children played a game with stones near a well, their laughter bright as church bells in the fading light. "Jake's back!" A boy of perhaps 10 came running, all knobby knees and sun-bleached hair. He skidded to a stop when he saw Margaret, eyes wide. "Tommy," Jake said, ruffling the boy's hair with his free hand. His other still rested at the small of Margaret's back, a warm weight she was acutely aware of. "Go tell Rosa we'll need an extra place at supper." The boy scampered off, but not before giving Margaret another curious look. She wondered what he saw: a torn dress, disheveled hair, the pale face of an Eastern woman completely out of place in this rough camp. Jake guided her toward a small adobe structure, one of several scattered around a central plaza. As they walked, she noticed how people greeted him with nods and quiet words. Respect, she realized. Perhaps even affection. This wasn't what she'd expected from an outlaw leader. "Most folks here got nowhere else to go," Jake said, as if reading her thoughts. "The war left a lot of people broken. Some of us wore blue, some gray. Doesn't matter now. We're all just trying to survive." A woman emerged from one of the buildings, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 40, with the kind of face that had once been beautiful and was now something better strong. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, pulled back in a practical bun. "Jake Colton," she said, hands on her hips. "What have you done now?" "Rosa, this is Maggie." He said the name like it had always been hers. "She'll be staying." Rosa's dark eyes took in everything: the torn dress, Margaret's trembling hands, the possessive way Jake stood just behind her. Something passed between Rosa and Jake, a silent communication born of long acquaintance. "Come on then, querida," Rosa said, her voice gentling. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed. You look ready to drop." Margaret wanted to protest, to demand answers, to insist she wasn't staying anywhere. But exhaustion was settling into her bones like lead, and the promise of food made her stomach clench with hunger. When Rosa held out a hand, Margaret took it. The older woman's house was small but clean, with bright woven blankets on the walls and herbs hanging from the rafters. Rosa bustled about, heating water and laying out clean clothes, a simple skirt and blouse, well worn but serviceable. "These were my daughters," Rosa said quietly. "She won't need them anymore." The past tense hung heavy in the air. Margaret didn't ask. As she washed the dust from her face and hands, Rosa talked. "Jake's not what you think. None of us are. Yes, they rob stages and trains, but only from the companies that robbed us first. Wells Fargo took my husband's land after he died, said the papers weren't legal because he was Mexican. The railroad did worse to others." Margaret changed into the borrowed clothes, her fingers fumbling with unfamiliar fastenings. The fabric was rougher than what she was used to, but it was clean and whole. "He could have left you in the desert," Rosa continued. "Will Garrett would have. That one's got a mean streak wider than the Rio Grande. But Jake brought you here, put his protection on you. That means something." "What does it mean?" Margaret asked, though she suspected she already knew. Rosa's smile was sad and knowing. "It means you're his woman now, whether you like it or not. But child, there are worse fates in this territory. Jake Colton is a hard man, but he's not a cruel one. He'll keep you safe, provide for you. In return—" She didn't finish, but Margaret understood. In return, she belonged to him. A knock interrupted them. Rosa opened the door to reveal Jake. Hat in hand. He'd washed too, she noticed, and changed his shirt. The gesture toward civilization surprised her. "Supper's ready," he said. His eyes found Margaret, taking in the borrowed clothes, the way her hair fell loose around her shoulders without its pins. Something flared in those storm-gray depths before he controlled it. The communal dinner was held in the largest building, a long adobe structure that served as meeting hall, church, and gathering place. Rough tables were laden with simple but plentiful food, beans and rice, cornbread, stewed meat that Margaret didn't ask about too closely. Jake led her to a seat at the main table. She was acutely aware of the attention focused on them, conversations dying as they passed. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Eat," he said quietly. "You need your strength." The first bite nearly made her moan. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food hit her stomach. She ate steadily, trying not to wolf it down like some savage. Around them, conversation slowly resumed. She learned much by listening. The camp held about 30 souls, former soldiers, displaced farmers, women who'd lost everything to the war or the westward expansion. There were Mexican families burned out by Anglo settlers, a Cherokee man who'd fled the Indian Territory, even a Chinese cook who'd run from the railroad camps. "We got one rule here," Jake said, loud enough for others to hear. "We take care of our own. Everyone works, everyone eats. Anyone raises a hand to a woman or child answers to me." The threat in that last statement was quiet but unmistakable. Margaret saw Will Garrett scowl into his plate from across the room. After supper, Jake walked her back to the small adobe house. She'd assumed it was Rosa's, but the older woman had stayed behind to help with cleanup. "This is yours," Jake said, opening the door. "Rosa lives next door if you need anything." The single room was sparse but clean, a narrow bed, a small table, a trunk for belongings. A lamp cast warm light over rough wooden floors. "I don't understand," Margaret said. "Why give me my own place if I'm—" She couldn't say the words. Jake stepped closer, and suddenly the small room felt smaller. "You're under my protection. That means you're safe from everyone, including me. I don't take unwilling women. Maggie?" The use of that name made something flutter in her chest. "But you said I was yours." "You are." His hand came up, fingers ghosting along her jaw. She shivered but didn't pull away. "That doesn't mean I'll force you. When you come to me, and you will come to me, it'll be because you want to." The arrogance of that statement should have infuriated her. Instead, it sent heat spiraling through her in ways that would have horrified her proper Boston sensibilities. "What makes you so sure?" she asked, proud when her voice didn't shake. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his harsh features. "Because you didn't pull away just now. Because your eyes go dark when I touch you. Because you're already starting to see that the world you knew was just as much a cage as this camp, it just had prettier bars." He stepped back, giving her space to breathe. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow you start learning how to live out here." He was at the door when she found her voice. "Jake!" He turned. "Thank you for the room, for not being what I expected." He touched the brim of his hat. "Good night, Maggie." After he left, Margaret sat on the narrow bed and tried to make sense of her new reality. She was a captive in an outlaw camp, under the protection of a man who claimed her as his but wouldn't touch her without permission. She should be terrified, should be planning escape. Instead, she found herself thinking about storm-gray eyes and rough hands that could be gentle, about a camp full of broken people trying to build something new, about the way her name sounded different on his lips, not Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, proper Boston lady, but Maggie, just Maggie. Outside her window, she could hear guitars and quiet singing. Someone was telling a story that made others laugh. Children were being called to bed. It sounded like community, family, even... For the first time since the stagecoach crashed, Margaret, no. Maggie allowed herself to consider that maybe she hadn't been kidnapped at all. Maybe she'd been saved. The morning sun painted the canyon walls the color of dried blood. Maggie woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of wood smoke. For a moment, she forgot where she was, then reality crashed back. The narrow bed, the adobe walls, the borrowed clothes laid out on the trunk. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Rosa entered with a basin of water and a knowing smile. "He's been up since before dawn," she said without preamble. "Watching your door like a hawk watches a mouse hole." Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." Rosa set the basin down. "That man hasn't shown interest in a woman since he came back from the war. Now he's prowling around like a caged mountain cat. You've stirred something in Jake Colton. Querida." After Rosa left, Maggie washed and dressed, trying not to think about Jake watching her door. She pinned her hair back severely, as if propriety could armor her against the strange feelings coursing through her. Outside, the camp was already alive with activity. Women tended gardens and ground corn. Men worked on weapons or mended tack. Children scattered feed for chickens. It was oddly normal. She found Jake by the corral, running his hands over a horse's legs, checking for injury. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. When he saw her, he straightened slowly, his eyes traveling over her in a way that made her skin prickle. "Morning." His voice was rougher than usual. "Sleep well." "Well enough." She kept her chin high, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward a saddled mare. "Can you really ride? Or were you just saying that yesterday?" "I can ride." She'd learned side saddle in Boston's carefully manicured parks. This would be different. "Show me." The mare was smaller than his bay gelding, but still intimidating. Maggie approached slowly, letting the animal get her scent. When she moved to mount, she realized the problem she'd have to ride astride in the borrowed skirt. "Here." Jake moved behind her, his hands settling at her waist. "I'll help you up." His touch burned through the thin fabric. When he lifted her, she could feel the strength in his arms, the controlled power. She settled into the saddle awkwardly, very aware of the improper position. "Relax," he said, adjusting her grip on the reins. His hand covered hers, calloused and warm. "She'll feel it if you're tense." He was right. The mare shifted restlessly until Maggie forced herself to breathe, to soften her spine. Jake made a sound of approval. "Better now. Walk her around the corral. Get used to each other." What followed was the strangest riding lesson of her life. Jake leaned against the fence, offering quiet corrections. "Heels down, back straight. Don't fight or work with her." Other members of the camp drifted over to watch. She heard whispers, saw speculative looks. Jake's woman. Learning to ride proper. She wondered if they were placing bets on how long she'd last. "You're thinking too much," Jake said. "Stop worrying about them and focus on the horse." She wanted to snap at him, but he was right. When she stopped thinking about the audience and concentrated on the mare's rhythm, everything smoothed out. The horse responded to lighter touches, turning and stopping with minimal pressure. "Good," Jake said. "Now try a trot." The next hour was humbling. Everything she'd learned in Boston was wrong for this kind of riding. Jake was patient but demanding, making her repeat movements until muscle memory began to form. When she finally dismounted, her legs shook like a newborn colt's. Jake steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "You did well." "I fell off twice." "Only twice? Will Garrett fell off 6 times his first day." She glanced at him, surprised by the hint of humor. "Really?" "Really, of course. He was also drunk and trying to impress a saloon girl." His thumb moved against her arm, just once, before he let go. "Come on, there's more to learn." The rest of the day was a series of lessons. How to care for the horse, checking hooves and coat. How to read the weather signs in the sky. How to find water in the desert. Jake taught with few words, showing rather than telling. His hands guided hers, adjusting her grip on a tool, positioning her fingers on the horse's legs to feel for heat that might indicate injury. Each touch was proper, necessary, and each touch left her more aware of him, his scent, his warmth, the way his body moved with unconscious grace. Lunch was a simple affair of bread and dried meat, eaten in the shade of a ramada. Jake produced a canteen and offered it to her first. The gesture was small but significant in the desert. Water was precious. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Teaching me these things." He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the harsh landscape. "Because knowing how to survive out here is the difference between living and dying. And because—" He turned to her, gray eyes intense. "I want you to stay because you choose to, not because you can't leave." Her breath caught. "You'd let me go?" "I'd take you to the nearest town myself, if that's what you wanted." His jaw tightened. "Wouldn't like it, but I'd do it." She studied his face, searching for deception, found none. "And if I stayed?" Something flared in his eyes, hunger, hope, possession. "Then we'd see what happens next." The afternoon brought a different kind of lesson. Jake led her to a flat area away from the main camp. He pulled a revolver from his holster, checked it, then held it out to her. "You need to know how to protect yourself." The gun was heavier than she expected, the metal warm from being against his body. He moved behind her, adjusting her stance. Both hands, arms straight but not locked. His chest pressed against her back as he guided her arms up. "See that can on the fence? Line up the sights." She tried to focus on the target, but all she could feel was Jake surrounding her. His breath stirred her hair. His arms bracketed hers. When she pulled the trigger, the shot went wide. "Again," he said, voice rumbling through her. "This time, breathe out slowly as you squeeze." The second shot clipped the can. The third knocked it off the fence. Jake made a sound of approval that vibrated through her. "Natural talent," he said, stepping back. The loss of his warmth left her oddly bereft. She turned to find him watching her with an unreadable expression. "What?" "You're not what I expected, Maggie Thornton." "What did you expect?" "Tears, hysteria, demands to be taken to civilization." He took the gun back, his fingers brushing hers. "Not a woman who learns to shoot after 3 tries and looks like she enjoyed it." She had enjoyed it. She realized the power, the precision, the way Jake's approval made something warm bloom in her chest. As the sun began to sink, painting long shadows across the camp, Jake walked her back to her adobe. At the door, he paused. "There's a gathering tonight. Music, dancing. You don't have to come, but..." He seemed to search for words. "It might help folks get used to you, and you to them. Will you be there?" His smile was slow, dangerous. "Would it matter if I was..." "Yes," her heart whispered. "I'm simply curious about camp customs," she said instead. "Liar." But he said it gently, like an endearment. "I'll be there, playing guitar, if the boys can talk me into it." The image of Jake Colton, feared outlaw, playing guitar was so incongruous she almost smiled. "Then perhaps I'll attend." He reached out, caught a strand of hair that had escaped her pins, wound it around his finger once before letting go. "Wear it down tonight." "That's hardly proper." "Nothing about this is proper, Maggie." His voice dropped lower. "Haven't you figured that out yet?" After he left, she stood in her doorway watching him walk away. The set of his shoulders, the confident stride, the way other men nodded respectfully as he passed. She was beginning to understand the hierarchy of the camp, and Jake Colton sat firmly at its apex. Rosa appeared with a bundle of clothing. "For tonight," she said, eyes twinkling, "unless you want to wear that funeral dress." It was a skirt and blouse in deep blue, with colorful embroidery at the neckline, prettier than what she'd worn today, though still simple by Boston standards. "Rosa," Maggie said impulsively. "Tell me about him, about Jake." The older woman's face softened. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." Rosa laughed. "That would take more than one evening, querida, but come, help me with dinner, and I'll tell you what I can." As they worked side by side, Rosa talked. Jake had been a Union soldier. She said a lieutenant who'd seen too much death, lost too many men. He'd come west after the war, drifting until he'd found others like himself, people the expanding country had chewed up and spit out. "He doesn't rob for pleasure or greed." Rosa said, "Everything goes to keeping us fed, keeping us safe. He's building something here, though I don't think even he knows what yet." "And women?" Maggie asked carefully. "Has he... were there others?" Rosa's knowing smile returned. "A few tried to catch his eye, none succeeded, until yesterday, when he rode in with you looking like thunder and lightning all at once. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Maggie heard guitars tuning up, voices laughing. She changed into the blue skirt and blouse, then stood before the small mirror, debating. Finally, she pulled the pins from her hair, letting it fall in waves past her shoulders. Jake had asked, and she found to her surprise and mild alarm that she wanted to please him. She was beginning to understand that the bars of her cage weren't locked. The door stood open. She could leave. The question was, did she want to? The days fell into a rhythm as steady as desert rain. Mornings began with Rosa's knock and ended with Jake walking her to her door, their conversations growing longer each night. In between, Maggie learned the ways of Paradise Valley. She learned to grind corn with Maria, a Mexican woman whose husband had been killed by rangers. The work was hard, repetitive, but Maria sang while they worked old songs that needed no translation. She learned to mend with Sarah, a former schoolteacher from Missouri whose hands shook from memories she wouldn't discuss. She helped tend the children, teaching letters in the dust when no slate could be found. "You're good with them," Ellen said one afternoon. She was barely 18. with a baby on her hip and eyes too old for her face. Patient-like. Maggie adjusted little Anna's grip on the charcoal pencil. I taught Sunday school back home. Where's home? The question caught her off guard. When had she stopped thinking of Boston as home? Back east, she said vaguely. Ellen wasn't fooled. You don't talk like someone who wants to go back. She was right. Each day, Boston felt more like a dream corseted, confined, colorless compared to this vivid life. Here, she woke to painted sunrises and fell asleep to coyote songs. Here, her hands grew calloused and strong. Here, Jake Colton watched her with eyes that promised things that would have scandalized proper society. 3 weeks into her stay, she graduated from the mare to Jake's bay gelding. He lifted her into the saddle, hands lingering as they always did. He doesn't let anyone else ride Storm, Tommy informed her, eyes wide. Not even Will Garrett, and he's segundo, second in command. She was learning the Spanish words that peppered conversation here, where Mexican and Anglo and Indian lived side by side. Just don't tell Storm he's special, Jake said dryly. He's already too proud. They rode out together, leaving the canyon for the open desert. Jake showed her how to read the land, which plants held water, which shadows meant shelter, how to spot rattlesnakes before they struck. He was a good teacher, patient with her mistakes, quick to praise success. You're taking to this life, he observed as they watered the horses at a hidden spring. Is that so surprising? Most Eastern ladies would be begging for civilization by now. She thought of her life in Boston, the endless social calls, the suffocating expectations, the proper young men who'd courted her with all the passion of business transactions. Maybe I wasn't meant to be an Eastern lady. Jake moved closer, backing her against a cottonwood tree. What were you meant to be, Maggie? Her breath caught. He was so close she could see gold flecks in his gray eyes, could count the sun lines at their corners. I don't know. I do. His hand came up, thumb tracing her cheekbone. You were meant to be here, with me. She should protest, should remind him and herself that she was his captive, that this was improper, impossible. Instead, she leaned into his touch. Jake! I know. His forehead touched hers. I know you're not ready, but God help me. Maggie, you're driving me half mad, the way you look in the morning sunlight. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. The way you laugh with the children. I don't understand what you want from me. Everything. The word was fierce, possessive. I want everything you're willing to give, and I want you to give it freely. He stepped back abruptly, leaving her breathless against the tree. The ride back was silent, charged with unspoken words. That evening, she helped serve supper, falling into the routine of camp life. Jake sat in his usual place, but his eyes followed her movements. When Will Garrett made some comment that made the other men laugh, Jake's expression darkened. Something funny. Will, Rosa asked mildly, but Maggie caught the warning in it. Just wondering how long Jake's gonna play the gentleman. Will's pale eyes fixed on Maggie. Man claims a woman. He ought to... The crack of Jake's fist against Will's jaw was loud as a gunshot. Will went down hard, scattering plates. Jake stood over him, deathly calm. You were saying... Will spat blood. Nothing. Jake wasn't saying nothing. Good, because next time you disrespect her, we'll have more than words. The hall was silent. Maggie's hands trembled as she clutched a water pitcher. Jake's eyes found hers across the room, and what she saw there made her knees weak, not just possession, but protection. Not just want, but something deeper. Later, as he walked her home, she asked, Why did you hit him? He insulted you. He insulted you. Actually, your restraint. Jake stopped walking. Is that what you think this is restraint? Isn't it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Maggie, if you knew what I want to do every time I look at you, Restraint doesn't begin to cover it. Heat flooded her. Then why? Because you're not some saloon girl to be tumbled and forgotten. Because when I take you, his voice roughened. When you come to me, it'll be for keeps. No going back. She understood then. This wasn't about conquest. It was about claiming, yes, but also about being claimed in return. Jake Colton, who could have simply taken what he wanted, was waiting for her to choose. The next morning brought trouble. A rider came in hard, horse lathered with sweat. Maggie recognized him as Sam, one of the men who'd been on the raid when they'd taken her. "Posse," he gasped. "About 20 men, 2 days behind. Someone talked." Jake's face went hard as granite. "How many know about this place?" "Don't think they do, but they're tracking our general direction." What followed was organized chaos. Women packed essentials. Men checked weapons and saddled horses. This was clearly not their first time fleeing. "We have 3 refuges," Rosa explained as they bundled food. "Jake always has a plan." Maggie found Jake in the corral, saddling Storm. "What can I do?" He paused, looking at her. "Can you handle a full day's ride, Truth Maggie?" "Yes." "Then help Rosa with the children. Keep them calm." He caught her arm as she turned to go. "Stay close to me on the trail, no matter what happens." The evacuation was swift, practiced. Within 2 hours, the camp was moving a long line of riders and pack animals winding into the canyon. Maggie rode with Anna in front of her, the child's weight a warm reminder of what they were protecting. Jake rode at the front, but his eyes found her regularly. Will Garrett brought up the rear with several other men, watching for pursuit. They climbed into mountains she hadn't known existed, following trails invisible to her eyes. The children were remarkably quiet, understanding the need for silence. When they finally stopped at sunset, they were high in pine forests, the desert far below. "Good work," Jake said quietly, lifting Anna from her arms. His hand brushed hers. "You did well today." Camp that night was cold. Fires kept small. Maggie shared her blanket with Ellen and her baby, body heat precious in the mountain air. She dozed fitfully, waking to see Jake sitting guard, rifle across his knees, silhouetted against stars. The second day was harder. The trail grew steeper, more treacherous. When Anna grew too heavy, Jake wordlessly took the child, settling her in front of him. Watching him gentle with the little girl did something to Maggie's heart she didn't want to examine. By afternoon, they reached the refuge, a hidden valley with a spring, natural caves for shelter, and multiple escape routes. Everyone fell into making camp with weary efficiency. "How often does this happen?" Maggie asked Rosa. "Every few months. It's the price of the life we've chosen." Rosa studied her, having second thoughts. Was she thought of Boston, of safety and propriety and predictable days. Then she looked at Jake, organizing defenses, protecting his people. Thought of the children playing despite their hard lives, of the women who'd become her friends, of the way this harsh land was teaching her strength she hadn't known she possessed. "No," she said softly. "No second thoughts?" That night, Jake played guitar as promised. His voice was rough but true, singing old songs that made the former soldiers grow quiet with memory. Maggie sat near the fire, letting the music wash over her. When his eyes met hers across the flames, she felt that familiar flutter. Stronger now. Will Garrett watched too, his bruised jaw a reminder of the morning's violence. Something in his pale gaze made her shiver. Cold, Jake appeared beside her, draping his coat over her shoulders. It smelled of leather and sage and him. "Thank you." He sat next to her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "We'll stay here a few days, let the posse lose our trail, then find a new place to build. Does it bother you always moving?" "Used to it by now." He was quiet a moment. "What bothers me is putting you through this. You could be safe in Boston, drinking tea in some parlor." "I never liked tea." The words came without thought. or parlors, or anything about that life. Really. His hand found hers in the darkness. What do you like, Maggie? You, her heart whispered. This, us. I'm still figuring that out, she said instead. His thumb moved across her knuckles. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. Later, alone in a small tent, wrapped in his coat and her own confused feelings, Maggie admitted the truth. She wasn't staying because she had to anymore. She was staying because leaving would mean losing the community, the purpose, the way Jake looked at her like she was worth fighting for. She was staying because somewhere between that first terrifying moment and now, Paradise Valley had become home, and Jake Colton. Jake was becoming something she didn't have words for yet. But she would, soon. The trouble started with a poker game. They'd been in the mountain refuge for 3 days when Will Garrett suggested cards to pass the time. Jake was out scouting with Sam and 2 others, checking if the posse had given up the chase. Most of the women were washing clothes at the spring. Maggie had stayed behind to help Rosa with the children. Come on, schoolmarm, Will called out, using the mocking nickname he'd given her. Bet you played whist in those Boston parlors. I don't gamble, Maggie said coolly, not looking up from the arithmetic lesson she was teaching Tommy. Everything's a gamble out here. Will's voice carried an edge that made her skin crawl. Jake's gambling right now, leaving you unguarded. She ain't unguarded. Old Moses, the Cherokee man, spoke from where he was mending harness. We all look after our own. Will's laugh was ugly. That's so way I see it. Jake ain't made things official. Man shouldn't leave his claim unmarked. Maggie's hand stilled on the chalk. The children sensed the tension, little Anna pressing closer to her side. Perhaps you should focus on your cards, Mr. Garrett, Rosa said pleasantly, but steel undergirded her tone. Just making conversation. Will stood, stretching lazily, his pale eyes fixed on Maggie. Though I wonder what a lady like her sees in this life, unless maybe it ain't the life she's interested in. What's that supposed to mean? Tommy demanded, bristling like a young rooster. Nothing, boy. Just seems strange. A proper Eastern lady taking to Jake so quick. Makes a man wonder what kind of woman she really is. The insult was clear. Maggie felt heat rise in her cheeks. But before she could respond, Moses stood. You got something to say. Say it plain. Will's hand drifted toward his gun. Maybe I am saying it plain. Maybe Jake's been played for a fool by a pretty face. Wouldn't be the first time a woman... Will... The voice cracked like a whip. Jake stood at the edge of camp, dust covered from riding, eyes like frozen thunder. Step away from her. Jake, I heard what you were doing. Jake moved forward with predatory grace. Question is, are you drunk or just stupid? Will's face flushed. A man's got a right to speak his mind. Not about her. Jake's voice dropped dangerously low. Never about her. The camp held its breath. Maggie could see others drawing back, creating space for what everyone sensed was coming. You're soft on her. Will spat. It's making you weak. Time was. Jake Colton would have betted a woman like that first night, not played nursemaid for weeks. Jake's fist moved so fast Maggie barely saw it. Will staggered back, blood streaming from his nose. But this time, he didn't stay down. His gun cleared leather in a smooth draw. The shot was impossibly loud in the mountain air. Will's gun spun away as he clutched his hand, howling. Jake held his smoking Colt steady, eyes never leaving Will's face. Next one goes in your head, Jake said calmly. Pack your things. You're done here. You can't, Will started. I can and I am. You've got 10 minutes before I forget we rode together. Will looked around for support, found none. Even the men who usually backed him were stone-faced. He'd crossed a line, and everyone knew it. As Will stumbled away to gather his belonging, Jake holstered his gun and turned to Maggie. The ice in his eyes thawed into something warmer, more concerned. You all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands shook as she set down the chalk. "Tommy, take the little ones to Rose's tent," Jake said quietly. The boy obeyed immediately, herding the children away. When they were alone, Jake crossed to her in 2 strides. His hands framed her face, tilting it up to study her eyes. "He didn't touch you." "No." The word came out breathless. "Jake, what he said was lies born of jealousy and meanness." His thumb stroked her cheekbone. "Don't let his poison get in your head. Maggie?" "But I am making you weak." The words tumbled out. "You've been patient, gentle, nothing like the man I was before you." He rested his forehead against hers. "That's not weakness, sweetheart. That's you making me want to be better than I am." The endearment, the first he'd used, made her heart skip. "Jake, I know what they're saying, that I should have claimed you proper by now, that I'm going soft." His hand slid to her shoulders. "Let them talk. They don't understand what's between us." "Do you," she whispered, "understand it?" He pulled back to look at her, and what she saw in his eyes stole her breath. "I understand that when I saw him threatening you, I wanted to kill him. I understand that every night when I leave you at your door, it takes everything I have to walk away. I understand that somewhere between kidnapping you and now, you've become necessary, as breathing." A shout interrupted whatever she might have said. Sam was running toward them. Jake Ryder coming in under a white flag. Jake's expression hardened. He squeezed Maggie's shoulders once, then turned to face this new threat. "Armed." "Can't tell. Alone, though." The camp mobilized quickly. Women and children moved to protected positions. Men took defensive posts. Jake stood in the open, hand near his gun but not on it. Maggie started to move toward cover, but he caught her hand. "Stay where I can see you." The rider came slowly, hands visible. As he drew closer, Maggie gasped. She knew that face, those expensive clothes now travel-worn. "Thornton," Jake said flatly. Charles Thornton, her late father's business partner. The man who'd been pressing his suit since her father's death dismounted carefully. His eyes found Maggie, widened at her appearance. The simple clothes, the sun-touched skin, her hair in a loose braid. "Margaret, thank God you're alive." He started toward her, but Jake stepped between them. "That's close enough." "See here, Colton. I've come under truce to negotiate for Miss Thornton's release." "I wasn't aware she needed releasing." Jake's voice was deceptively mild. Charles flushed. "You kidnapped her from the stage. Her mother is beside herself. I've been authorized to pay—" "I'm not for sale. Charles." Maggie stepped around Jake, chin high. "Nor am I kidnapped." "Margaret, you can't mean—" His eyes traveled over her again, and his expression hardened. "What has he done to you?" "Given me a choice," she said simply. "Something you never did." Charles's face darkened. "You're confused, traumatized. Once we get you back to civilization—" "I am civilized." She felt Jake's presence behind her, solid and reassuring. "For the first time in my life, I'm living by my own choices." "This is madness." Charles pulled a paper from his coat. "I have here a warrant for Colton's arrest, signed by a federal judge. Surrender Miss Thornton, and I'm authorized to let you and your people disappear." Jake laughed, low and dangerous. "You ride into my camp with a dozen guns on you and make threats." "It's not a threat. There's a cavalry unit 2 days behind me. Return Margaret, or what?" Jake moved closer to Charles, who stepped back nervously. "You'll bring soldiers to attack women and children. That's your idea of civilized. You're outlaws. We're survivors," Moses said from his position. "Which is more than you'll be if you don't ride out." Charles looked desperately at Maggie. "Your mother needs you. The business needs managing. You have responsibilities." "The business you've been stealing from since my father died." Maggie's voice was ice. "The marriage you arranged to cover your theft, I know about the altered books. Charles, I found them before I left." His face went white. "You can't prove." "I can and I will, if you force me." She stepped closer to Jake, felt his hand settle possessively on her waist. "Go back to Boston. Tell my mother I'm well. Tell her I've found where I belong." "With him," Charles spat the words. "A killer, a thief. A man who's shown me more honor in weeks than you did in years." She lifted her chin. "Yes, with him." Jake's arm tightened around her. When he spoke, his voice carried the finality of a judge's gavel. "You've got your answer. Now get out before I forget that white flag." Charles looked between them, his face cycling through rage, disbelief, and finally, calculation. "This isn't over. The army—" "Tell the army we'll be gone before they get here." Jake smiled, all teeth. "Tell them Jake Colton's taking his woman deeper into the territories. Tell them whatever you want, but get out of my sight." Charles mounted clumsily, his city softness showing. He gave Maggie one last look. "You'll regret this, when he's dead or hanged, when you're alone with nothing." "I'll still be free," she said softly. "That's worth any risk." After Charles rode away, the camp slowly relaxed, but Jake kept his arm around Maggie, holding her against him as if Charles might return to snatch her away. 2 days, Sam said grimly. "We need to move." "Tonight," Jake decided. "We'll travel by dark, split into groups." He looked down at Maggie. "You sure about this? It's not too late." She silenced him by turning in his arms, her hands flat against his chest. "I'm sure, more sure than I've ever been about anything." Something shifted in his expression. The careful control he'd maintained for weeks cracked, showing the raw need beneath. "Maggie." "I know," she whispered. "I know." Around them, people scattered to prepare for another flight, but for a moment, they stood frozen, the air between them electric with possibility. "After," Jake said roughly, "after we're safe, after I've courted you proper, after—" "After," she agreed, though every nerve in her body screamed for now. He pressed his lips to her forehead, the gesture somehow more intimate than a kiss would have been. "Pack light. It's going to be a hard ride." As she moved to obey, Maggie felt the last chains of her old life snap. Charles would spin stories, paint her as ruined, mad, lost. Let him. She'd found something worth more than reputation or safety. She'd found home in the arms of an outlaw, and she'd defend it with the same fierce protectiveness Jake had shown for her. Will Garrett was gone, Charles was defeated, and the army was coming. But as she watched Jake organize their escape with calm efficiency, Maggie felt no fear, only anticipation for what came after. The storm hit just after midnight. They'd been riding for hours. The camp split into 3 groups to confuse pursuit. Jake led the main party women, children, and most of the supplies. Sam took the fastest riders south as decoys. Moses led a small group west with the spare horses. Maggie rode beside Jake, alert despite her weariness. The night had been clear when they started, stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. But the wind changed, bringing the metallic taste of rain. "Storm coming," Jake said quietly. "Bad one." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the landscape in stark relief. Thunder followed, so loud it spooked the horses. Then the rain came not gradually, but all at once, like God had overturned a bucket. Within minutes, the trail became a river. Horses struggled for footing. Children cried as water soaked through blankets. The temperature plummeted, desert heat replaced by bone-deep cold. "The caves," Jake shouted over the storm. 2 miles north." But 2 miles might as well have been 20. The rain turned to hail, stinging exposed skin. Lightning struck a pine tree ahead, exploding it into flaming splinters that the rain quickly doused. Horses screamed and reared. Maggie's mount slipped, going to its knees She kicked free of the stirrups as it went down, landing hard in the mud. Strong hands hauled her upright, Jake, his face grim with worry. "Can you ride double?" he yelled. She nodded, and he lifted her onto Storm. The big gelding was steady despite the chaos. Responding to Jake's firm hand, Jake swung up behind her, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other controlling the reins. "Hold on." They pushed forward, Jake using his body to shield her from the worst of the hail. Around them, others struggled through the deluge. Rosa had little Anna, both soaked through. Ellen clutched her baby, trying to protect him from the elements. The caves appeared like Salvation dark mouths in the cliff face, promising shelter. Jake dismounted first, steadying Maggie as she slid down. Her legs barely held her. "Get everyone inside," he ordered. "I'll help with the horses." But Maggie grabbed his arm. "Together," she said fiercely. Something flashed in his eyes: surprise, pride, possession. "Together," he agreed. They worked side by side, helping people into the largest cave, then fighting to get panicked horses under the rock overhangs. The storm raged like a living thing, trying to tear them apart. By the time everyone was safe, Maggie couldn't stop shaking. "Here." Rosa appeared with blankets, relatively dry from waterproof packs. "Both of you, out of those wet clothes before you freeze." The cave was large, with smaller chambers branching off. Someone had already started a fire near the entrance, smoke drawing out. People huddled in family groups, sharing warmth and blankets. Jake led Maggie to a smaller side chamber, away from the others. He built another small fire, then turned his back. "Change," he ordered. Rosa brought dry things. She peeled off her soaked clothing with numb fingers, struggling with buttons and laces. The dry clothes, another borrowed skirt and blouse, felt like heaven against her chilled skin. When she turned, she found Jake had changed too, his wet shirt replaced with a dry one. He held out a blanket. "Come here." She went without hesitation. He wrapped the blanket around both of them, pulling her back against his chest as they sat by the fire. His arms encircled her, sharing his body heat. "Better," his voice rumbled through her. "Yes, but she couldn't stop trembling." "Just the cold and shock," he murmured. "It'll pass." They sat in silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Gradually, her shaking eased. Warmth crept back into her limbs from the fire, the blanket, and most of all from Jake's solid presence behind her. "You stayed," he said suddenly. "Charles offered you safety, civilization, everything you knew. You stayed." "Did you think I wouldn't?" His arms tightened. Part of me wondered, when he talked about your mother, the business. She turned in his arms to face him. "My mother will understand. Eventually. The business was my father's dream, not mine. And Charles..." She shuddered. "He never saw me, only what I represented. Property to acquire." "And what do I see?" Jake's eyes were intense in the firelight. "I don't know," she whispered. "Tell me." He lifted a hand to her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "I see strength you don't even know you have, courage that takes my breath away, beauty that goes bone deep." His voice roughened. "I see my future, if you'll have me." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. Thunder crashed, shaking the cave, and Maggie made her choice. She leaned forward and kissed him. For a heartbeat, he went absolutely still. Then his control shattered. His hand tangled in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she'd received from Boston suitors. This was fire and demand, promise and possession. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Maggie..." "I know," she said softly. But I needed you to know." He made a sound that might have been a laugh or a groan. "You're going to be the death of me, woman." Another crash of thunder, but this time she didn't flinch. She was safe in Jake's arms, surrounded by his warmth, his strength, his carefully leashed desire. "Tell me about after," she said. "When we're safe." "What then?" He shifted, settling her more comfortably against him. "We'll find land somewhere they can't reach us. Build proper homes, not just camps. Maybe raise horses. Storm's got good bloodlines." "And us," she prompted. His arms tightened. "I'll court you proper, or as proper as I can manage out here. Then, if you're willing, we'll speak words in front of the others. Make it official." "Jake Colton, are you proposing?" "I'm promising," he corrected. "When I propose, you'll know it." They talked quietly as the storm raged about dreams, plans, the life they could build. Jake told her about his family's farm in Ohio, destroyed by the war. She told him about feeling suffocated by Boston society, always knowing she didn't quite fit. "Maybe that's why we work," he said. "Two misfits making our own place." The storm began to ease near dawn. Jake reluctantly released her to check on the others. Maggie dozed by the fire, waking when Rosa brought coffee and hard biscuits. "That's a well-kissed look if I ever saw one," Rosa said with a knowing smile. Maggie blushed but didn't deny it. Nothing improper happened?" "More's the pity." Rosa's eyes danced. "That man's been wound tighter than a watch spring for weeks. A little impropriety might do you both good." Before Maggie could respond, Jake returned. His expression was grim. "Scouts are back. The cavalry unit split up. One group's following Sam's decoy trail, but another is heading this way. They've got an Indian tracker." Fear trickled down Maggie's spine. "How long?" "Day, maybe less. Storm washed out our tracks, but once it clears—" He looked at her intently. "There's a mission station a day's ride north. Mexican territory. They'd give you sanctuary." "You mean give us sanctuary?" "Maggie?" "No." She stood, facing him down. "We stay together. You promised." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "Together," he agreed roughly. "Always." The next hours were controlled chaos. As soon as the storm passed, they moved out. The ground was treacherous with mud, but it would dry quickly under the desert sun. They had to make distance while they could. Maggie rode beside Jake, alert for danger. The landscape had changed in the storm. Familiar landmarks washed away. New gullies carved by flash floods. But Jake navigated unerringly, that internal compass that marked him as a true son of the frontier. At midday, they met Moses's group at the planned rendezvous. No sign of Sam yet, but that was expected. His decoy run would take longer. "Cavalry's closer than we thought," Moses reported. "Saw their dust maybe 5 miles back." Jake cursed quietly. "The mission's our best chance. Father Miguel's no friend to the army." They pushed harder, horses lathered with sweat. Maggie's world narrowed to the rhythm of hoofbeats, the burn of sun on her shoulders, Jake's presence beside her. Then Ellen's baby started crying, not normal fussing, but high, pained wails. Ellen herself was flushed, swaying in the saddle. "Fever," Rosa diagnosed quickly. "Both of them. We need to stop." "We can't," someone protested. "The army will catch us anyway if we're slowed by sick riders." Jake decided, "There's a box canyon near here. Defensible. We make our stand there." Maggie's heart clenched. A stand meant fighting. Fighting meant dying. But as she watched Jake organize defenses, calm, competent, thinking of everyone's safety before his own, she knew there was nowhere else she'd rather be. Storm or soldiers, fever or flood. She'd face it all beside this man who taught her what freedom really meant. The sun was setting when they reached the canyon, painting the rocks blood red. Fitting, Maggie thought grimly. By dawn. That might be more than metaphor. But tonight, she was alive. Tonight, she was free. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged in the wild heart of the frontier. with an outlaw's promise of forever. Tomorrow would bring what it would, but tonight, she had this Jake's hand finding hers in the gathering darkness, rough and warm and absolutely certain. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None," she said, and meant it. Thunder rumbled in the distance, another storm coming. But this time, Maggie didn't tremble. She was done running from storms. Dawn came painted in gunmetal gray, the air heavy with the promise of violence. Maggie stood beside Jake on the canyon rim, watching dust clouds that marked the approaching cavalry. 20 men, maybe more, their blue uniforms dark spots against the pale desert. "They'll demand surrender," Jake said quietly. "Offer terms. Will you consider them?" He looked at her, something fierce and tender in his eyes. "Would you want me to?" She thought of the life waiting if she returned Charles's manipulations exposed, her mother's disappointment, society's judgment, the cage of propriety, gilded but still confining. "No," she said firmly, "but I won't have others die for my choice." "Our choice," he corrected. "And it won't come to dying. I've got one more card to play." Before she could ask what he meant, a shout rose from below. The cavalry had arrived. Forming a line just out of rifle range, an officer rode forward under a white flag. "Jake Colton, I'm Captain Morrison, 8th Cavalry. You're surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender the woman and yourself, and I guarantee fair treatment for your people." Jake laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. "Fair treatment, like the fair treatment the Cherokee got, like the fair treatment those Mexican families received before we took them in. This isn't a debate. Colton, you have 1 hour to decide." As Morrison rode back, Jake turned to his people. They'd gathered in the natural amphitheater of the canyon, men, women, children, faces marked by hardship but not defeat. "You all know me," Jake said, his voice carrying, "No, I've never asked you to follow where I wouldn't lead. This badge wants me, and they want Miss Thornton returned to her rightful life. But this is bigger than that. This is about our right to live free." "We're with you, Jake," Moses said. Others nodded agreement. "Then here's what we do." Jake outlined his plan quickly, efficiently. Maggie listened with growing amazement and not a little fear. It was audacious, risky, brilliant if it worked. "And if it doesn't work?" Ellen asked. Baby quiet in her arms. The fever had broken in the night, but both mother and child were still weak. "Then we scatter. You all know the backup routes, but I think Captain Morrison's about to learn why they call this Paradise Valley's last stand." The hour passed quickly. Preparations made. Positions taken. Maggie found herself with Rosa and the other women, ready to provide covering fire if needed. The weight of the rifle Jake had given her was oddly comforting. "Never thought I'd see the day," Rosa murmured. Jake Colton ready to throw it all away for a woman. "He's not throwing anything away," Maggie said. "He's building something new." Rosa's smile was knowing. "That's what I meant, querida." Captain Morrison rode forward again, this time with a smaller escort. "Time's up, Colton. What's your answer?" Jake appeared on the canyon rim, Maggie beside him. She'd insisted, over his protests. If this was their stand, they'd make it together. "My answer is this. Captain, Miss Thornton is here of her own free will. She's made her choice. As for me and mine, we claim sanctuary." Morrison laughed. "Sanctuary, this isn't a church. Colton." "No," Jake agreed. "It's Mexican territory." Silence fell like a hammer. Morrison's face went red, then white. "You're lying." "Check your maps, Captain. Check them real careful. That storm 2 nights ago washed out Skeleton Creek, the old border. We crossed the new line about 2 miles back." It was the card Jake had been holding, the shifting border, the technicality that might save them. Maggie held her breath. "Even if that's true," Morrison began. "It is true." A new voice rang out. Father Miguel rode into view, his brown cassock dusty from hard travel. Behind him came a small group of Mexican soldiers, their commander's uniform marked with official insignia. Comandante Reyes. The officer introduced himself. I received word from Father Miguel about American soldiers threatening people on Mexican soil. This is concerning... Morrison's jaw worked. These are wanted criminals. On your side of the border, perhaps here, they are under Mexican protection, unless you wish to create an international incident. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Maggie could feel Jake coiled beside her, ready for violence if it came. But Morrison was a career soldier. He knew the implications of crossing into Mexican territory uninvited. This isn't over, Colton, he said finally. You can't hide behind borders forever. Not hiding. Jake replied, just choosing where to make our home. Give my regards to Charles Thornton. Tell him Miss Margaret sends her regrets, but she's found a better offer. Maggie stepped forward. Captain Morrison. He looked at her, taking in her frontier clothes, her sun-touched skin, the rifle in her hands. Miss Thornton, your mother will receive a letter explaining my choice. I'm not kidnapped, not coerced, not confused. I'm free. For the first time in my life, truly free. This man is an outlaw. This man, she interrupted, has shown me more honor and respect than any gentleman in Boston. I choose him. I choose this life, and I'll defend both with my last breath. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Then he touched his hat brim. Your choice, miss, God help you. The cavalry withdrew in good order, watched by Mexican soldiers who stayed until the dust settled. Only then did Comandante Reyes approach Jake. Father Miguel speaks highly of you, Senor Colton. Says you've helped many of our people. We help each other, Jake said simply. See, well, you have sanctuary for now. But perhaps we can discuss a more permanent arrangement. Mexico needs good horsemen, good fighters, men who understand loyalty. It was an offer of legitimacy, Maggie realized, a chance to be more than outlaws. Jake looked at his people, then at her. We'll discuss it, he said. But first, there's something needs doing. He dropped to one knee right there, in front of everyone. Pulled out a ring she recognized it as one Rosa wore, pressed into service for this moment. Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, he said, voice carrying clearly. Maggie, you've ridden with me through storm and fire, faced down armies for the right to choose, so I'm asking you to choose again. Be my wife. Build a life with me. Here, in this new land, where we can be free. Her throat closed with emotion. Around them, people waited, barely breathing. Yes, she managed. Yes, Jake Colton. Today, tomorrow. Always. He slipped the borrowed ring on her finger, then stood and kissed her. Not gentle this time, but claiming, celebrating, promises made flesh. Around them, people cheered. Father Miguel cleared his throat, eyes twinkling. Perhaps while I'm here. And so, as the sun climbed toward noon, Margaret Elizabeth Thornton married Jake Colton in a box canyon on the Mexican border. Their witnesses were outlaws and refugees, soldiers and holy men. Rosa stood for her, Moses for him. The children threw desert wildflowers. When Father Miguel pronounced them wed, Jake kissed her again. Softer this time. No going back now, he whispered. No going back, she agreed. The celebration was brief but joyful. They had little some mezcal appeared from somewhere. Rosa organized food. Someone played a fiddle, but Maggie had never been happier. She danced with her husband under the vast sky, surrounded by their chosen family. The Comandante's offer, she said as they swayed together. Will you take it? We'll take it, he corrected. Partners. Remember your education, my experience. We could build something real here. Safe, lasting. She thought of the possibilities. A ranch, perhaps. Horses, as Jake dreamed. A school for the children. A place where anyone could find sanctuary, regardless of their past. Together, she said. Together, he agreed, and sealed it with a kiss. That night, in a private corner of the canyon, Jake made good on all those weeks of promises. He was gentle and fierce by turns, worshipful and demanding. She gave as good as she got, this proper Boston lady who'd found her wild heart in an outlaw's arms. Later, wrapped in blankets and each other, they watched stars wheel overhead. Regrets, he asked, as he had before. Only one, she said, making him tense. I wish my father could have met you. He would have liked you. Jake relaxed, pulled her closer. What would he have thought of this, his daughter married to an outlaw? Former outlaw, she corrected. And he would have seen what I see. A good man who'll protect what's his. A leader who puts his people first. The kind of man who'd ride through hell for love. Sweet talker, he murmured against her hair. I learned from the best. They dozed, woke, loved again, made plans between kisses. The future stretched before them, uncertain but theirs to shape. When dawn came, it found them still entwined, wedding rings catching first light. The camp stirred around them, preparing for the journey to their new home. Comandante Reyes had offered them land near the mission good grass, water, shelter from those who might still hunt them. Ready? Jake asked as they prepared to ride. Maggie looked back once at the canyon that had sheltered them, then forward to the unknown trail. Her husband waited, patient, loving, hers. Ready, she said, and meant it. They rode out together as the sun climbed, leading their people toward a new life. Behind them lay Boston society, outlaw camps, the narrow definitions of who they were supposed to be. Ahead lay possibility. Margaret Elizabeth Thornton was dead. In her place rode Maggie Colton, wife, partner, free woman of the frontier. She wore pants for riding, a gun for protection, and a ring that meant everything. And when Jake reached over to take her hand as they rode, she knew she'd found what she'd never known to look for. Home. 25 years later, the ranch sprawled across the valley like a promise kept. Adobe buildings clustered around a central courtyard where children played and fountains sang. Horses grazed in pastures green from careful irrigation. It was everything Jake had dreamed and more. Maggie sat on the wide veranda, silver threading through hair still worn long. She was writing in her journal the same leather-bound book that had survived that first stagecoach robbery. Its pages now held the story of a life fully lived. Mama! Her daughter Catherine appeared. So like Maggie at that age, it stole breath. Papa's asking for you. Maggie's heart clenched. Jake had been asking for her more often these days, as if afraid she might vanish if he didn't confirm her presence. The strong man who'd once faced down armies was fighting a different battle now, one against time itself. She found him in their bedroom, propped against pillows. The years had weathered him like desert stone, but his eyes were still that storm gray that had captured her so long ago. There's my wild rose, he said, voice rougher now, but warm with the same love. Flatterer. She sat beside him, taking his hand. Still calloused, still strong, though trembling slightly. Catherine says you need me. Always need you. He studied her face as if memorizing it. Was thinking about that first day, how you trembled when I lifted you from that coach. I was terrified, she admitted. Liar. You were magnificent, standing there with your chin up, ready to fight the whole gang if needed. His thumb stroked her wedding ring, worn smooth by years. Knew right then you were going to change everything. We changed everything, she corrected. Together. Through the window, she could see the life they'd built, Moses's grandchildren playing with hers. Rosa, gray-haired but still spry, teaching the young women traditional weaving, the school where former outlaws' children learned beside merchants' sons and vaqueros' daughters. No regrets, Jake asked. Their old ritual? Only that we didn't have longer. Had more than most, quarter-century of freedom, love, family. He squeezed her hand. Tell me about the children. She updated him on their scattered brood. James, their eldest, running the northern portion of the ranch. Maria, named for Rosa's lost daughter, married to a doctor in Santa Fe. Thomas, wild as his father, serving as a ranger but on the right side of the law. Catherine, the baby, engaged to the commandante's nephew. Good lives, Jake murmured. Safe lives, because of you. Because of us. They sat quietly, watching shadows lengthen. Then Jake spoke again. Urgent now. The journal, you're still writing our story. Every day. Good. Want them to know? Not the dime novel version, the truth. That sometimes freedom means choosing the harder path. That love isn't always proper or easy. That two broken people can build something whole. They'll know. She promised. That night, Jake Colton died as he'd lived on his own terms, surrounded by chosen family, holding his wife's hand, the man who'd survived bullets and nooses, cavalry charges and desert storms. Simply closed his eyes and rode on ahead. The funeral drew hundreds. Former outlaws stood beside lawmen. Mexican families mourned beside Anglos. Father Miguel, ancient now, spoke of redemption and love. Comandante Reyes, long retired, told of a man who'd bridged two worlds. Maggie stood straight-backed and dry-eyed until they lowered him into the ground. Then she trembled, just once, remembering another time she'd trembled in his presence. Rosa's arm came around her, strong and steady. He's not gone. Querida, not while we remember. The years passed. Maggie ran the ranch with the same fierce competence she'd learned from Jake. She saw grandchildren born, watched the frontier transform around her. The wild days faded into legend, but she kept them alive in her journal. She was 72 when the young newspaperman came calling, wanting stories of the notorious Jake Colton. She served him tea and told him truth. He wasn't notorious, she said firmly. He was necessary, in a time when the world was changing too fast, when people got ground up in progress. He stood for those who had no voice. Yes, he robbed stages, from companies that robbed entire families. Yes, he lived outside the law, because the law served only those who wrote it. But the kidnapping, the young man ventured. Maggie laughed, still musical despite her age. Young man, I was never kidnapped. I was rescued. From a life that would have suffocated me. From a marriage that would have been another kind of prison. Jake Colton gave me the greatest gift possible choice. What happened to Will Garrett, the stories say? Will died badly, 5 years after Jake expelled him. Shot in the back during a real robbery, the kind that hurt innocent people. Jake heard about it, said it was a waste. Even tried to help Will's woman and child after. That was Jake, fierce in anger, but unable to abandon anyone truly in need. She showed him the ranch records, how many families they'd helped establish, how many children they'd educated, how many bridges they'd built between communities. This is Jake Colton's true legacy. Not the robberies or the gunfights, but this a place where anyone could find sanctuary and build new lives. When the reporter left, Maggie climbed slowly to the cemetery on the hill. Jake's stone was simple: Jacob Colton, husband, father, free man. She sat beside it as sunset painted the sky in shades of memory. Told him about the interview, the grandchildren, the new foal from Storm's line. Talked until stars emerged and coyotes sang their ancient songs. Still no regrets, she whispered finally. Never any regrets? In her dreams that night, she was 25 again, trembling in the arms of a rough outlaw who promised to keep her safe. But now she knew the secret she'd kept him safe too. Safe from becoming the monster the world might have made him. Safe to be the man he truly was. She woke to her granddaughter's hand on her shoulder. Grandmother, you were smiling in your sleep. Was I? I was remembering. Tell me, the girl, another Maggie. Third of the name curled up beside her. So she told it again. The story of a woman who trembled when rough hands claimed her waist, but found in that claim not captivity, but freedom. Told of storms weathered and battles won, of love that broke every rule and built new ones. "Were you really happy, giving up everything?" young Maggie asked. "I gave up nothing that mattered and gained everything that did." She touched her granddaughter's face. "Remember that, little one. When your time comes to choose between safe and free, choose free. Choose the one who sees you true, even if the world calls him wrong. Choose love that demands all but gives even more." 2 years later, Margaret Elizabeth Colton died in her sleep. Journal in her lap, last entry unfinished. They buried her beside Jake and swore the wind sounded like whispered endearments. The journal survived, was published, became history instead of legend. Scholars debated, romantics sighed, but those who'd known them just smiled. The truth was simpler and more complex than any story. 2 people, broken by a world that didn't fit them, built their own world instead. And in that building, that choosing, that daily decision to be free, they wrote a love story for the ages. On quiet nights at the ranch, old-timers swear you can still hear it, the echo of hoofbeats, a woman's laugh, a man's rough voice gentle with love. And sometimes, if the moon is right and the desert wind blows just so, you can see them, Jake tall in the saddle, Maggie beside him, riding eternal into the sunset of memory. Free, together, forever. As Rosa told the great-grandchildren, she trembled that first time. See, but not from fear. Her body knew before her mind this was the hand she was meant to hold. This was the life she was meant to live. This was the love that would change everything. And in the end, it did. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed this tale of Margaret and Jake, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier love stories. And share your thoughts about what touched your heart in this story. Until next time, partners.